In this artifact, Robert talks about some of his favorite camping experiences with his kids, also his time in the courtroom. This is Marcy with Artifact, and I've enjoyed sitting down with Robert and having him explain some of those cases that he really had to work hard for, as well as some of his life lessons learned. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy. What were some of your favorite camping experiences that you've had with your family and with your kids?
Well, we had a lot of them because in that area where I'm from, there's a lot of outdoors activities. The western Upper Peninsula is populated by hardly any people, really. The county that I lived in was the second largest county geographically, with probably the least amount of people. For a county that was maybe 40 or 50 miles wide and long, had only 10,000 people. The biggest town of 2,500 people, which was the one that I was in. So a lot of the things we did with the kids were canoe trips, and one in particular was we were going down the middle branch of the Ontonagon River with Renee and my wife Bonnie and my son Joel, and we all crashed in our canoes over a waterfall. And I thought that my son was drowned. Turns out that my daughter and my wife were caught in the rapids with their canoe, and they had to get that out. We thought we lost that canoe. It was raining. We finally had to get out of the water, and we both got out of the water. We were looking for my oldest son Joel. And lo and behold, he was able to salvage most of our equipment that was going down the river and these rapids. He had saved the other canoe and the paddles. It all ended up with a happy ending. And one of the funny things that happened later on is when we were finally done with a lot of this ordeal, my wife was cooking, was making dinner, and she had some pork and beans in a can that she was putting into a pan, and she had a knife and she was cutting something, and she cut the tip of her finger off, and the blood flowed straight up in the air. She almost fainted, and we had to wrap that up with a bandage. And eventually we went to canoed the rest of another day down to the mouth of the river, the Ontonagon River, and we parked the canoe and the canoes. By this time we had salvaged the other canoe, and then I had left my car or van at my mother's house, which is a few blocks from the town. And when I got there, she came to the top of the stairs and she said to me, "Robert, what took you so long? I have dinner waiting. Why didn't you call?" And I looked at her in amazement because there's absolutely no phones anywhere. I says, how many phone stations do you think there are along the shore of the Ontonagon River? And she just turned her head and walked away. So that was one of our, I don't know if it's so much funny, but one of our most memorable canoe trips that we ever took, actually.
How was your wife's finger after that? Almost cutting the tip off.
Well, the worst part was we don't know what happened at the tip of the finger. We think it might have gone into the pork and beans and somebody might have eaten it. But
oh, my gosh.
Anyway, she was fine after we bandaged it up and it healed. And she had the canoe with that hand, well, I believe it was her thumb, so it was sticking straight up in the air. But that was the comical part of the whole thing. And we've taken other canoe trips and camping trips with the kids. Another one was we went hiking up into the Porcupine Mountains in October. It was semi-snowing and sleeting. It was just me and the three older kids. And we got into a cabin up in at a place called Mirror Lake after we had hiked in for an hour or two. And it was raining, and our big thing was to make pork steak for the kids. But when we got to the camping grounds or to the cabin, we couldn't find any dry wood. We could hardly make a fire. We couldn't cook the meat. My son tried to cook it. He probably stayed up all night trying to heat it up, and eventually, I'm not sure if he ate it or not, but that's another one that is a memory for them.
Oh, I was going to ask if you ever had an encounter with wild animals.
Well, sort of. As a kid, there were all kinds of bears in the area. They'd come into our neighborhood, and I know the sheriff had to shoot the mother and three cubs. It was kind of sad up in a tree. But our funniest encounter was later on in life. We went to an island called Isle Royale in the middle of Lake Superior with my son-in-law, Mike, and my two sons, Joel and Peter. And Peter was maybe 15 or 16 at the time. But that island is an island with only moose and wolves on the island. And while we were setting up our camp, while we were in an Adirondack shack, it's a story that's been repeated 100 times with different versions. Everybody got really scared and jumped around in the Adirondack because a huge moose came right up to the side of the thing, and we were kind of afraid it was going to come right in because all it was wire mesh stopping it from coming in. But the stories have been exaggerated of who jumped the most, who was most afraid, and of course we all accused each other of doing it. And then at the same time, later on in that trip, we were setting up our tents, and another big the moose, the big one, came right into it where we're sitting, all hiding behind trees. And I said, Peter, who was 15, I thought, go get the camera and take pictures of the moose. And he did, and, a little dangerous, but we got the pictures. So that's another episode of wild animals. But other than that, in my own version, there's some scary times with some of my friends, but nobody ever got attacked or hurt, that's for sure. There's a lot of bear, there's a lot of coyotes, there's a lot of wolves. Especially now, there weren't wolves when I was a kid, but they have planted them now, and they're a bane to the local hunters. They hate having them around.
I know that they've repopulated some of the Yellowstone National Park.
Right.
Were the kids ever afraid of having a bear get into their food and stuff? Because do you have to worry about that?
Yes, it's always a precaution. I think we're pretty good at that. I don't know bears ever getting any of their stuff, but you have to hang your food up higher. If you have that, and you have to be careful not to take too many types of food that would attract the bear, because they'll go in and take stuff. I was one time invited. I was going to take the kids down to the Smokies. I was talking to a representative or someone from the national park there, if it is a national park. And I just as a sideline, I asked her when the campgrounds would open, and I had looked at some of the places where I might want to go. And just as an aside, before I hung up, I said, is there any problem? Are there many bear around? She told me that there's like 5,000 bear in the Smoky Park, and it kind of turned me off. I decided not to go.
So for your kids, do they still go camping with their families?
Yep, they do. They all have been up to that area a lot of times. They've been to the Smokies themselves. They're all pretty good campers. Two of my children were out in California, and one was in California. They go to the Big Sur and other places. My youngest son lives near Colorado. Of course, they take advantage of the mountainous area and have done a lot of camping. I have a son that's kind of an adventurer. He's walked up in Jackson Hole, up in the mountains. I think that's Wyoming. He's walked all around where Jeremiah Johnson's story was, and a lot of those guys. And they've done a lot of biking too.
That's great that they loved doing that together too, from when they were little.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys ever have a time where you got lost?
No, we had a situation where someone almost got lost. I've had relatives of mine that have gotten lost. People had to look for them. Everybody thought we were lost. I was with three of my friends when I was about a junior in high school on a canoe trip, and we ran into some really bad rock cliffs and bad canoeing, and we were supposed to be home in, say, 2 days, and we weren't home in 3 days, so they sent the state police out looking for us, and they sent airplanes looking for us, and finally we made it down this treacherous river and came out on Lake Superior. But no, we never really got lost in the way that you're talking about.
But I'm sure that was terrifying for your parents to have to send out police reinforcements looking for you guys.
Sure, they were worried, but my mother never showed it, or my dad that I can recall. I'm not so sure they knew about it, but everybody else did. I didn't tell them.
So now things are a lot different with GPS. We have it on our phone and stuff. Did you teach your kids how to do orienteering with the compasses?
Well, yes, with compasses in the woods. I think that they learned a lot just from experience and using them. But in regard to my youngest son, Peter, he and I took the hunter safety course here in Wisconsin, which you have to take, and I took it with him to go deer hunting when you're like 14 or so. So we did that together, and that was orienteering. I learned a lot of that in my Boy Scout camps that I went to, and I think my older son learned some of it. I don't think the girls ever learned it, but that was something that we had to do in order to go hunting.
That's great that you were able to do that with your kids, but you also had a full career. Can you tell me a little bit about some of your law practice?
Yeah, well, I had always wanted to be a lawyer, and eventually I ended up going to law school at Marquette University. And one of the reasons I went there was there was a friend of the family that had a law practice in Milwaukee, and I had my eyes on trying to get a job, or at least using him as a starting point to either mentor or steer me in the right direction. And that's exactly what I did do. And I worked for that law firm for about 3 years and decided to go out on my own when I was about 28 years old. Usually when you get out of law school, traditionally you went to undergrad, got out at 4 years of college at 22, and then 3 years of law school. So I had 7 years of education that I was tired of and I had to work. So I did in this law firm, a big law firm, a new law firm, not a medium-sized law firm. And I had all kinds of great experiences there. They basically threw me into the fire, so to speak, with jury trials. I argued my first Supreme Court case 1 year out of law school. And you can appreciate in those days, no computers, typewriters, IBM Selectric was just coming in. Printing was a huge chore. You had to hire printers to do everything. And so it was a big deal. I had a lot of jury trials. And 3 years out, I decided to start my own practice. So with a law school classmate of mine who I had gotten the firm to hire, gotten back from Vietnam. And so the two of us went out on our own. It was a big move, had our wives together to decide whether we could afford it and what kind of clients we had. Eventually, we started up our own practice, and we did that for about 7 years after that. It didn't work out for a lot of different reasons, and nothing really bad, but just wasn't working, so I just went strictly on my own probably in the late 70s, and I was on my own ever since until this past January. As a matter of fact, I have my very last case that was carryover coming up in next Tuesday.
Wow.
In federal court, one of those federal, I was appointed to be a federal defender many years ago, and I handled a lot of these RICO, drug conspiracy, criminal cases over the last 25 or 30 years. So this is the very last one that is ending. But in the course of that law career, I had my own, I had lots of attorneys work for me. I had lots of secretaries. I probably represented over 10,000 different cases over that period of time. I had hundreds of trials. I probably had 50 to 75 jury trials. I had murder cases. I had large civil cases. I had big probate cases. I had corporate cases. I was a defense lawyer for the Chubb Group for 25 years. As an aside, kind of a last of a dying breed in the general practice. I would do plaintiff's work and defendant's work and everything in between. So it was a very rewarding practice. And as a result of it, I was able to help, thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of people over that time period.
And then one thing you brought up, they didn't have all the technology.
You had the dictaphone with the tapes that they rolled around, blue plastic tapes that were about 6 inches wide that went around on a disc and talked into them. Then you put that on the file and give it to your secretary, and she'd start typing.
So how close was your first practice to what somebody would see an old Perry Mason?
Actually, it was very, very pretty something like that, because there was always, you always are trying to come up with a gimmick to win your case, and you're trying to find somebody or sending your investigator out to search for something. You're trying to do things ahead of time so the other side couldn't win. And sometimes the things weren't all kosher, so to speak. One time I had a murder case. I had a guy that murdered someone that night. I went down to the jail in the middle of the night to see him, and he told me where the gun was, where he killed the guy with, a local bar called the Ski Hut. I went home from the jail, got that information. I went down to the bar early in the morning. He told me he put it at 2 or 3 yards down by a fence. I was going to get the gun and hide it so the cops could never find it. So I went down there, and in those days, you kind of knew all the police who were on the vice squad, the detectives, and they saw me coming, and I went up to the bar, and they said, well, Panagora, how you doing? I said, I'm good. And I just came down to see what's going on, and Dickie hired me last night. I'm going to come down. It's okay. And then so I started looking around a little bit. Then I started walking like I was leaving, and I went to the area where I thought the gun might be, and I kind of looked over that way, and one of the cops yelled at me, Panagor. I said, yeah. And they says, is this what you're looking for? And they pulled up the gun, and there it was. So that was the plan didn't work. Other times there was guys that hid heroin in places, or the proceeds from the robbery. These guys are like armed robbers or bank robbers. They were safe crackers. They were drug dealers. You knew it. And you knew a lot of them from the neighborhood where my partner and the guy that hired me married into a Mexican family of about 12 kids, and they knew everybody all around, the fences, the dealers, the guys that would be bodyguards, or there could be potential hitmen. They knew the mafia people. There was a mafia connection here in Milwaukee at one time at the Ballastry organization who was out of Kansas City. So it was a wild and woolly time, I'll tell you that.
So if you knew something ahead of time, did you have to be really careful that it wouldn't get leaked into the wrong hands?
Attorneys don't have to disclose anything that they get from their clients because of attorney-client privilege. So yeah, you had to always be careful that if you had something in your case, you didn't want anybody to know about it. You kept everything close to the vest. As the practice of the law developed over these 40 or 50 years that I was in it, it became more that you had to share your information with the other side. But one time I had a case, it was one of the greatest cases, one of the best cases we had. Another guy and I actually tried it together against some guy that wanted to collect a lot of money from someone that slipped and fell on the ice in front of my little old lady's house. And they were asking for a lot of money. And so we tried the case, but we had hired a investigator that had hidden in a van with a TV camera. And he took pictures of the plaintiff, the guy that was claiming the injuries, basically working a side business that he denied that he was doing. In other words, we had information that could prove that he was lying through his teeth, but we didn't tell the other side. So when you talk about disclosing information, we didn't tell him.
Yeah.
And during the trial, I told the other attorney, I said, you better be careful. I says, it's high noon and something's going to happen. If you remember the old movie, they had the shootout in the middle of the street. And that afternoon, after lunch, we presented this witness. The jury found him to have no damages, gave him absolutely nothing, and just blew him right out of the saddle. And of course, they were shocked. And, had we given that information to them ahead of time, which we didn't have to do, and that's
people have cell phones, so they've got their cell phones out and they're videoing and stuff, that it is maybe harder to not have things disclosed that you wouldn't want disclosed.
Well, that's how a lot of the law enforcement wins their cases. I do cases where they're called unbiased cases, and they're usually a drug deal gone bad, where the person that the drug is, the victim is a user and dies from the heroin or amphetamines that the dealer gives them, and then they charge the dealer with murder. So a lot of the ways they get these dealers is they get their phones and they ping the various towers that they're on, and they can kind of locate where they were. And it really helps their case and hurts the defense trying to win the case. That's one of the areas. The cell phones, cause all the things that people put on them, the law enforcement can use against them.
Yeah. Now, did any of your kids go into law enforcement?
Nobody's in law enforcement. My daughter is a lawyer. She does not work in that area now, but she did work for me for a period of time and had to do some criminal cases for me and for herself. Had some pretty good cases, I think. But the other children are not in it. One's an engineer working for Lockheed Martin. One's a urban archer, and the other is a drama teacher out in California.
And I was curious, you had talked about having your first case before the Supreme Court right after you became a law student. Do you think having to kind of get thrown into the fire like that gave you the courage to start your own practice?
I kind of always, one of the things I said early on, I wanted to be a lawyer. I said, I for whatever reason, I always wanted to be my own boss. I'm not good having someone tell me what to do. It seemed like all of my family, my father, my grandparents, and the people I looked up to were all entrepreneurs or had their own businesses, and that was really important to me. So, that's what I always wanted to do was be on my own. So when I got my first job, I said, bring it on. You give me anything. I did things that people can't even believe I did. One time I went to lunch with my boss, and those guys in those days were sometimes 2 big vodka martinis, double martinis for lunch, and they were shined up by 1 o'clock. One time I went to lunch and they sent me to court to take care of his case. And when I walked in there, the judge was waiting with a jury that was in panel and all the other attorneys. I was late because I didn't know what time I was supposed to start, and I got chewed out. I had to try a jury trial right on the spot without even knowing anything. I went over to the guy, I'll never forget him, Freddie Marciniak, and he said to me, Penagor, if you lose this case when I get out, I'm gonna come and get you. I don't care. I got to do it. After a 2-day trial, the jury came back not guilty. I lucked out. But yes, I believe being thrown in the fire toughens you up and makes you a way better lawyer, because in that business as a trial attorney, you have to think on your feet every second.
Were you ever on the debate team in high school?
I wasn't on a debate team, but I was in forensics, and that kind of was, I did dramatic dialogue. We didn't have a debate team, but I would love to have had it. I have two granddaughters now that are on what they call the We the People program, and they're actually going to Washington, D.C. for the Nationals in a month or so. But those are like all about the United States Constitution and presentations before a panel and answering questions. It's very similar to arguing a case before a Supreme Court. So I wish I would have had that in school. But no, we didn't have a debate team. But I was my class president. I was always, trying to speak out for people. I was in school plays. And so those are the kind of things that were, I think, good training to be a lawyer.
What was a time when you saw an injustice that ruffled your feathers?
Well, I always felt I was the kind of guy that would take care of the kid that couldn't take care of themselves so much. So I said earlier I was sort of the spokesperson. If I saw somebody getting, for example, picked on, I think I was there to kind of interfere, make sure that didn't happen. If I felt the school was doing something that wasn't right for the student body, right or wrong, I would speak up and think I was the person that should speak up for them. That was sort of built into my blood for some reason. I don't know. I can't tell you why from a child why that happened, but that's who I ended up being. And pretty much that's the way it went. I mean, I was in my sports programs, I was like the captains of the team and pretty much recognized as wanting to do that. So I thought when I wanted to be a lawyer, I thought that was the kind of person that could be a good lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any particular cause. I wasn't heavy on, the injustices of for civil rights. I just wanted to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. One guy said to me one time, my mentor in Boston, my first job, he said, Bob, and he was dying of prostate cancer. And he had all kinds of accolades. He was this and that. He was politically the county Democratic chairman. He was a big wheel. And he said to me over a couple of drinks, he said, when I die, what I want on my tombstone is here lies Matt Shimon, a lawyer. So I always fancied myself as being someone like Paladin from the TV show. He said he have gun, will travel. I represented every kind of person you can think of, bad, good, whatever. Mine was to make sure that their rights were protected and they had to say it was brought out. I wasn't really into one area. I wasn't political. I wasn't real big on social justice. So kind of an anomaly maybe.
Well, but just speaking out, making sure that everyone's voice is heard.
My mother was one of those to be that way. She always wanted me to, I don't know what, she taught me early on when I shake someone's hand, when you shake the hand and look a man in the eye, don't look down, don't look up, look right at him and have a firm handshake, that kind of thing.
Did you pass that on to your kids?
Tried to. They remember it. I know that when they try to tease me now and at our family dinner, it comes up.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. But I do have to ask, did your kids ever try to negotiate with you?
Well, I'm sure they did in their own way. I don't necessarily recall any negotiation, but they all have probably tried. But, they usually got, I think, what they wanted. They may differ with me, but I didn't necessarily pass on my negotiating skills or I tried not to have my legal skills. My wife always corrects me, even to this day. I'm not on the stand now. Stop using your lawyer things and asking questions, but can't help it.